cheap microphone and an old guitar. I'm a big star at a local bar with a cheap microphone and an old guitar. Cheap microphone and an old guitar. Cheap microphone and an old guitar. I'm a big star at a local bar with a cheap microphone and an old guitar.
It's January 21st. It's Friday, and this is Real Talk. Jesperson here with Hoyles and Brooks. Coming up in just a few minutes, we're going to take a look at what's making news today. Meatloaf died. Plus, we're going to take a look at celebrity athletes and sports personalities that do us wrong, that fail in the morality department, that don't meet up to the standards that we expect from those making millions of dollars and receiving our praise and our adoration and our celebration. And we've got three prominent Canadian sports voices to chime in on where fans should be at mentally and otherwise in processing the off-court or outside the arena antics of those whom we uphold. Bruce Arthur, Seerat Sohi, and Tara Slone coming up in about a half hour on the show. This show is presented by the team at Bitcoin Well, our title sponsor. If you have questions about Bitcoin, this is where you want to go. You can find them online. You can check them out under the sponsors tab on our website, or you can visit them in person. They just opened up a brand new office in downtown Calgary. Congratulations to them. They're Canada's first publicly traded Bitcoin ATM company with more than 200 Bitcoin ATMs in Canada, more of them internationally, and they're leading the charge, or at least responding to some of this early demand. A lot of employees are being, they're being offered on behalf of the corporations an opportunity to get paid in Bitcoin. You can ask them about their employer Bitcoin savings plan, all part of what they offer at Bitcoin Well.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
In about 10 minutes, Stephen Kimber will join me. He's the author of Alexa. If you follow federal politics, you may or may not know that the former leader of the New Democrats, the first woman to lead a major provincial political party in Canada, Alexa McDonough, the NDP in Nova Scotia, passed away this past Saturday, January 15th, at the age of 77 after a lengthy struggle with Alzheimer's. Stephen Kimber literally wrote the book on her. We're going to find out why her career was so significant and what people are remembering and perhaps maybe some of the relevance. When we take a look at some of the political perspectives, approaches, and trends these days, where did Alexa McDonough really blaze a trail? We'll look for your reflections on that as well. Sarah Hoyles is the editorial producer of this show, and she's keeping an eye on the stories that are making news today. Yesterday, Alberta's Premier Jason Kenney with the CEO of Alberta Health Services, speaking to reporters, taking questions, talking about COVID-19, and there seemed to be, I guess, do you say maybe, Sarah, a bit of a discrepancy with regards to some of the information people are trying to process, including some of the reporters that were there asking questions on the live call.
Yeah, I mean, what's happening is we're being told by the Premier that numbers are going down, that we're kind of at the end of the peak, or we've reached the peak and we're coming down the other side. Whereas we're hearing that hospitalizations are the highest they have ever been, and that extra beds are having to be created in both Edmonton and Calgary to deal with the hospitalizations. So yeah, two competing narratives.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I want it to be over. I want it to be done. I'm looking for all the signs that would indicate it's done, but we're talking to healthcare professionals. I think of, Doctors Bakshi Mathani that talked to us earlier this week, and you look at the exhaustion on their faces, and even the tweets that Dr. Bakshi was sending out after we talked to them, essentially just saying that they're just absolutely tapped. They're exhausted. You could hear the reporters yesterday, I think, trying to make sense of it. I don't know if you call them the dueling narratives, but of course you have the politicking of this, and then you have the reality checks on the health side. We wanted to go to a specific moment in that news availability yesterday to get you an idea of kind of the tone that the afternoon gathering took. And so here it is.
I'm a little confused on sort of the broad strokes of the situation. Premier, when we hear you talk about how we're at the peak or past the peak, and this won't be as bad as the last wave because it's not as intense on ICUs. When we hear Dr. Yu speak, we hear a much more dire situation. What are we to make of this? They're sort of almost competing narratives.
Well, I think you perhaps slightly mischaracterized what I said. I said that there are some hopeful signs, but also a need for ongoing caution. We see that our wastewater data shows declines in 14 of 19 locations across the province. Most importantly, the big cities. We have seen the stabilization and some early signs of a reduction in the positivity rate. And we also know that the typical Omicron wave around the world has lasted about 4 weeks. We're now into our fifth week, going into our 6th week. So I think you take all of those things together, and it's reasonable to infer that we are at or recently passed the peak of infections.
So that's the Premier's mindset, or Sarah, at least it gives some insight into where he or his advisors are coming from in evaluating this. The one that kind of, I think, catches my attention is when he says the typical Omicron wave, as you look around the world to other jurisdictions, lasts for about 4 weeks. And he says we're into like 4 or 5 weeks of this now. And I think a lot of people would say, okay, well, that would give us insight, that maybe this might be getting toward that light at the end of the tunnel. We can see it. And we're getting there. Hopefully it's not an oncoming train. But one of the reasons why I think a lot of people might be a little bit confused after what they heard yesterday, or generally speaking, is that we've heard this before. Like, people have been bracing themselves for getting out of this pandemic, for having these waves wrapped up, for having this all said and done for a long time now. It kind of reminds me of these road races you see where somebody's just fighting for that last kilometer and they're just kind of stumbling toward the finish line. And once they fall through that ribbon, they basically collapse on the pavement. And I don't think you can blame people. I don't know how you're feeling about it.
I just think it's wishful thinking. Like, yeah, of course, we all wish it was done. We all wish it was done. But it's not, and it just seems like the Premier is having a heck of a lot of wishful thinking.
But he's on the politician side, so I'm not defending him. But I think somebody needs to step up and say something that's not. Are you feeling the same way as I am? That there's so much despair and there's so much frustration that there needs to be some optimism, and it's hard to be optimistic without coming across this sort of rose-colored glasses. Maybe almost naive in how you view it, but I'm to the point where personally I need a little good news. I need some optimism on the file.
I just don't appreciate that he, is pretending that he's a medical professional, that he's saying, like we can infer by this data. No. Let's go to the 2 doctors, the 2 people that are in the medical field that are on that press conference to actually speak about what on earth is truly happening. And yeah, I'm right there with you. We're in the 5th wave. We're going into year 3 come March. Like, yeah, I do wish that, but the whole wishful thinking, rose-colored glasses is what got us into this situation in the first place. Yeah,
no, I agree with you. And it's the danger, right? The real danger is sending the message or leading people to believe that essentially it's almost done, right? I mean, Sam, I can see you nodding your head from across the room. I don't know where you're at on this. Do you kind of do you know what I'm getting at when I say I don't want people to mislead me, but I wouldn't mind if there was some reason for optimism. I'm not saying make it up. I'm not saying be inaccurate.
Yeah, I mean, he cites things like wastewater testing as showing trends, and he also cites things like, data that we've seen from all over the world. And it is well documented that I am no fan of Premier Kenney or the way that he's been handling this pandemic. But I think that, part of this question really comes down to what part do you say out loud? There may actually be data that suggests a trend going there, but we also have packed hospitals. We know that hospitals lag a couple weeks behind infections. It is a lagging indicator. A leading indicator would be something like wastewater samples. So I don't know if it's necessarily, I don't know if both things are necessarily completely competing here, but I also think that it is dangerous to give the public false hope. It is dangerous to say out loud, we're almost out of this, because that sort of gives them permission to let their guard down.
Right, and that's the threat, right? Or Hoyles, that's what you worry about, is that it will lead people to be less diligent, right? That it would sort of lead people to believe that we're virtually done, so we can start behaving like, it's all back to normal again. I don't know. I don't quite have the words for it, which is shocking maybe, but there's just been almost done, everybody. And then like, oh, yeah. No, actually not almost done. And it's just been time after time after time. How many times have restaurants like reopened and then gone back to no in-house dining, and then reopened and then gone back to no in-house? Literally, probably 10 times in some circumstances over the course of, like you said, more than 2 years, or coming up on 2 years to be accurate, right? It was like early March 2020 when all this went sideways. 2 years is a long time, right? We're at like 22, 23 months now. That's a long time.
But can I say that you look at Australia and you look at New Zealand, and they have done a different, I mean, they're talking about different jurisdictions. If you look at different jurisdictions, we didn't have to be here. And it's the rose-colored glasses.
I mean, woulda, coulda, shoulda. Yeah, you're right. It's true, though.
People are saying that they're so exhausted.
Well, I know. Well, sure, but it's like, sure, and you're not wrong. Nothing about what you're saying is wrong at all.
Thank you.
It's just like not necessarily a productive exercise. It's where I go in this. It's where I go in the same direction when people say like, look at Norway and how Norway handled its savings and its resource revenues. We should have done it like Norway. And number one, there's a lot of reasons why our situation is different than Norway's. And number two, we can't rewind the clock. So why are we talking about it?
But we could learn. We could learn, and we could change the course now. I know people are tired. I know like everyone has had it up to here, but can we not learn from our past mistakes? Well, come on.
The live chat is it's just a bunch of talk about best summer ever. And it's a great reference, because that was kind of the whole idea too, is like, we're nearing the end of it, right? And we're going to be done just in time for July 1st, which was super convenient that the pandemic was going to wrap up just in time for Canada Day celebration, so everybody could have their big parties and the Calgary Stampede could go ahead. I hate to give 2022 credit for this already, but it appears to be the year where we're going to lose a whole bunch of beloved celebrities. Or maybe that's just every year and we pay more attention to it in months like January and February. But Sarah, I was sad to see that the iconic singer Meatloaf has wrapped up his time here on Earth. The Bat Out of Hell singer, the legendary Meatloaf, dead at 74.
And I would do anything for love.
He had a lot of other songs, you know. I wonder if Meatloaf is a little bit like Bobby McFerrin, where everybody sings "Don't Worry," but he's like, I have like 30 great songs. Everybody only sings the one.
He is like, he was incredible. Just learning about him, sold 100 million albums worldwide.
Yeah.
And he's one of the best-selling, the album, Bat Out of Hell, is one of the best-selling albums of all time.
That's one that would fly under my radar at a trivia night.
Fair enough.
Right? Like, I don't think if you were to say the top 10 best-selling albums of all time, number one, I feel like those statistics are all skewed now, because how do we gauge? Like, now it's like streaming and downloads, and it's different. But I think you'd think probably like, you know, Beatles, maybe the White Album, obviously Michael Jackson, Thriller.
So Thriller's got to be up there.
It's got to be up there. What else? Like, what are like the top? The Eagles' Greatest Hits at the time was the best-selling album of all time when that was released after just their fourth studio album. I sound like I know what I'm talking about. Madonna's got to be in there. Prince has got to be in there.
Oh yeah. Prince,
and then what about all the like the bands that I'm too old to know about now? But there's like that super group out of Korea. They had their own Chicken McNuggets. Do you guys know BTS?
Yeah.
And then you've got like, I don't know, like I'm sure like Britney Spears and NSYNC, Taylor Swift. Yeah. See, like I wouldn't say Meatloaf. I wouldn't guess Meatloaf. But he had a good, like, do you remember, back in 2016, he was in our city. He was doing a show at the Northern Alberta Jubilee Auditorium and collapsed on stage, and it was a huge story for obvious reasons. I think that was like mid 2016, June or something like that. And a lot of people I don't think that Meatloaf's health had been on their radar, but for a lot of people that was a bit of a wake up call. So, I mean, 5-6 years ago, I mean, it's always kind of weird to say like, he had a good run, but
well, he did. He did. He was in Fight Club. He was in Rocky Horror Picture.
He was amazing in Fight Club.
Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yeah.
He was in Wayne's World. Like,
I forgot he was in Wayne's World.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I need to go back and watch Wayne's World again.
Yes, that is always a good idea.
What a great movie.
If you're going to spew into this.
That's one of the greatest clips of all time. If you're going to spew into this. All right, which advertiser wants to be mentioned right after that? How about our friends at St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge? If you're going to spew, Don't spew into your new truck. I don't know. I'm trying too hard. I'm trying way too hard. Can I tell you for a second about the Ram 1500 that I've been driving? I'm completely in love with this thing. I was talking to a buddy the other day. He says, is it true that you got out of your Grand Cherokee and you're into a Ram? I said, well, I don't know how long it's going to last. They're doing some body work for me on the Jeep, but I might not give this Ram back. And he goes, well, which Ram is it? Because he's a truck guy. He's a GM guy. But he goes, which Ram are you in? I said, I'm in the Longhorn edition. He goes, okay. And so I had a chance to show it to him yesterday, and he goes, I might need to trade in my rig. I said, well, you might need to, because the finishings on this thing, the details are stunning. The dash is like all screen. It's so beautiful. But of course, it's the performance of the Ram, the 1500 half ton, the 2500, the 3500 1 ton that keeps people coming back. It's why it's such a popular truck. It's why they have a hard time keeping them in stock at Sherwood and St. Albert Dodge. But the inventory is better now than it's been in a couple of years. You can check out all their inventory online. Just go via the sponsors tab on our website. When it's time to go visit them in person, you make sure you let them know that Real Talk sent you. Same deal with our friends at Eden Landscaping. You can find them online at landscapeedmonton.ca. And Mike really wanted me to hammer this home with Real Talkers. He says, I know that everybody has a hard time envisioning their summer projects when there's 18 inches of snow on the ground. But he goes, but this is really the time we want to be talking about what we're going to do. He says the construction materials can take some time to arrive. The design process can sometimes take a little bit longer than people expect, because we really want to make sure that we achieve perfection, bringing outdoor spaces to life. You can get the ball rolling. You can contact them today via landscapeedmonton.ca. And don't forget, at the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park this weekend and for the rest of the month of January, you can get dilly bars and DQ ice cream sandwiches for a buy one, get one free offer. This is the boxes I'm talking about, the take-home boxes. Why wouldn't you have a box or two of dilly bars and DQ ice cream sandwiches in your freezer? You never know when you might need them. These are the Dairy Queens at Palisades, Nemeo, Newcastle, Westmount, and in Sherwood Park on Baseline Road. Well, Alexa McDonough, I mean, I grew up, born 77, grew up in the 80s, the 90s. I mean, this was like basically kind of the height of her political career. I mean, she was a major player for Canadians of my vintage, and certainly people older than me. She blazed a trail for women in Canadian politics, selected as leader of the Nova Scotia New Democrats in 1980, the first woman to lead a major political party in Canada. And then, of course, she went on to lead the federal New Democrats in 1995, serving in that role for 8 years. She continued as a member of parliament out of the city of Halifax until 2008, when she left politics, passing away this past Saturday, January 15th, at the age of 77. Stephen Kimber is a professor of journalism at the University of King's College in Halifax. He published a biography about Alexa McDonough titled, appropriately, Alexa, in April of 2021. It's a pleasure to welcome Stephen to the show. Thanks for making time for us, and a good morning to you, Stephen. I think we've got you on mute, so Sam will get that sorted out quickly. There we go. We've got you. I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay.
What was it that prompted you to write the book about Alexa McDonough? What was it about her story or her career that really resonated with you?
Well, I'd known of her and known her in various. I covered Nova Scotia legislature. I'm old enough to have covered the Nova Scotia legislature back in the day when she was the only woman in the legislature. So it's been a long time. But her sons and her brother understood that she had Alzheimer's. She was coming to the end at some point of her life, and they wanted to see a book written about her. So I was delighted to do that, and I learned so much about her in that process as well. So it was a fascinating exercise to do the research and to write the book, for sure.
People, and I mean, when I have a conversation like this, I speak to my memory of a person. And so, as mentioned, I have sort of like teenaged into adulthood type recollections of her. I remember her being somebody who was quite gregarious, quite compelling as a personality, someone that really had a real energy around her that seemed to rally people. And as a kid growing up in Western Canada, in conservative country, she oftentimes struck me as somebody who could compel people that were maybe not sharing her political persuasion to at least consider her point of view. Did you see that in her, in the stories you heard about her, et cetera?
Absolutely. And I think that, in Nova Scotia, she never did that well, in spite of the fact of being this first woman leader of a major party and all of that stuff. The fact is that, she never was able to get them up above 3 or 4 seats. But the polls said if she'd been leading a different political party, she would have been the premier of Nova Scotia. And that's, that tells you something right there. What she brought, I think, to the table was engagement. She was engagement can be seen as a kind of a political skill, but in her case, it was really genuine. She would go out and meet people. She was always late for events because she couldn't stop talking to people. There's a great story, a couple great stories, but one is that at one point she was supposed to be going to an event in Cape Breton, and she and her aide drove up there, and they stopped at a Tim Hortons along the way. They sat and had their coffee, and then Alexa said, well, I have to go to the washroom. So the aide sat there. They were getting late for this meeting and event that they had to go to, and 5 minutes went by, 10 minutes went by, 20 minutes went by, still no Alexa. So finally the aide goes to the washroom, and it turns out that Alexa is in there engaged in a very deep discussion with the cleaning lady about her life, about her issues, about her problems. And that was so common. And so what you got was people who responded to that engagement and felt like she was genuine. She cared about them. So it worked in that way. I think what you felt from a distance, what I felt from a distance, people felt up close for sure.
Great comments here on our live chat. Sharon's watching us on YouTube. She says, I was such a fan of Alexa. She was such a fierce woman who spoke her truth. There was a sort of a fire to her as well. I mean, like there are certain things that you sort of character qualities that are implied when it comes to people that have the skills to lead federal political parties. You're obviously talking about people that are skilled in certain ways, but she also had a way to relate to people, right, on a personal level. And that's a tough skill to manufacture if you don't have it.
I think that's absolutely true. Another example of that, if you go back to 2002, and we're talking now just after 9/11 and all the fears of terrorism in our country and all of that sort of stuff, and an software engineer from Ottawa named Meher Arar was flying back from Tunisia to Canada. He was stopped at the Kennedy airport, arrested, held incommunicado for about 2 weeks, and then renditioned off to Syria, where he was put in prison and tortured. His wife could not get any information from the Canadian government, could not get any help from the Canadian government, but it was starting to leak out. There was a story in the New York Times. And so she was in Tunisia and picked up the phone, and this voice said, "Hi, it's Alexa McDonough calling." And Alexa reached out at a time when nobody wanted to get into these issues of terrorism and who might be. Everybody was a terrorist if they were accused of being a terrorist. But she reached out and said, "Look, we'll help you. When you get back to Canada, come see me. We'll deal with this." And Alexa led the attempt to get Meher Arar back, which they did eventually, and also get the public inquiry into what happened. And Monia the Mesli, who was Meher Arar's wife, said to me that she felt like this was a woman from God who'd been sent to her because she was so alone and so upset and had no hope. And eventually, it turned out that she was one of those people who was influenced by Alexa 1-to-1 and ended up running for the NDP. She didn't win, but she was not a political person at the time, became one simply because of Alexa. I think sometimes Alexa felt that if she had the opportunity to talk to every Canadian 1-to-1, she might have been prime minister, but that obviously is not the way it works.
That's an interesting insight, though. Like, and I feel like I can understand, like at my entry level understanding. I never had a chance to interview her, as far as I can remember. I don't think that we ever spoke, but there was kind of that compelling element around her that you meet certain types of politicians, certain individual politicians, and you think, I might vote for that person, even if I don't 100% agree with the entire platform, because I can see that person representing me, and I might be kind of comfortable with it.
Right. And I think that was absolutely true in her case, that, just sort of looking at social media over the past week and the number of people who've spoken out and paid tribute to her. So much of it was personal. I met her once. I went to see her because I had this problem once, and she left such a lasting impression on them that they still wanted to reach out and say something at this time. And this was her career. She was very open in public. She had a marriage that went south on her in the late 1980s. It was a nasty kind of breakup at the time, although, again, in a personal sense, she and her ex-husband didn't become friends, but they got together on occasions for social events. She had two other relationships, one with a union leader, the other with David McDonald, who was a Tory politician. And, she kept those relationships through the years. So it wasn't just politics. In terms of Alexa, there's sort of two groups of women. There were a group of women who were girls at the time. They were in their teens, and she led them. There's a place in Halifax called Africville, which is pretty infamous as a Black community that was raised in the 1960s. And Alexa was in a church group that they were talking about, apartheid in South Africa. And Alexa said, well, hey, wait a minute, there's issues here in Nova Scotia that we should be looking at. This 14-year-old girl, right? So she organized with these other women, three other women, a summer camp for kids from Africa. Well, that may sound a little patronizing in our time today, but it was genuine and it was real. Those women, the girls who organized it, were still friends by the time Alexa died. They get together all the time. They talk. Some of those women were there to help her when Alexa was in her difficulties with her health. The other group was a group at the NDP headquarters in Halifax, staff group. They would get together once a month, go out, drink, socialize, have dinner, talk about the bosses, all that sort of stuff. And Alexa found out about this and said, can I come? And at first it was sort of like, no, we're really not sure that we want the boss along for this. But she came. She became part of that group. And again, when she had Alzheimer's in the past year and a half, 2 years, it's been very difficult for her and for the family. A lot of the people who have been continuing caregivers for Alexa, support for Alexa in a personal way, have been these women from what they call the Girls' Night Out. So, so it's, we go politics, but we also go personal. And that also ties in, obviously, to the whole thing about her as a female leader and somebody who opened the way for a lot of women to get into politics, regardless of their political stripes. I mean, again, looking at social media, I can see a number of politicians who have talked about her influence on them. And some of them are liberals, some of them are Tories. Sure. Some of them are obviously are NDP. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's still relatively rare. I mean, at one point we had, women premiers. I think there were three of them at one point, if I'm remembering correctly. Christy Clark, Alison Redford, and Kathleen Wynne would have all been premiers at the same time. I hope I'm not excluding or forgetting anybody, but relatively speaking, it's still somewhat rare. I mean, Annamie Paul obviously led the Greens through the most recent election, but for that matter, it was mostly men as well, right? I mean, there's still those. We still don't see equity or at least equal representation in politics. If you think, I mean, if there's people having coffee or beers or wine this weekend and sort of casually eulogizing her, or people that will be looking back on her career regardless of their partisan persuasion, in the context of what she did for women in politics, or what she did for the New Democrats, or what she did from a position of leadership provincially and then federally, what do you think that they'll be talking about? What do you think people will remember with regards to the stamp that she put, or the mark that she left on Canadian politics?
I think, it's more personal and broad strokes politics than it is, electoral, right? I mean, if you, in Nova Scotia, she led the NDP from nowhere to nowhere, basically. I mean, she was the only person when she was elected. When she left, there were three. But the organizational work, the on-the-ground work that she did is probably what led the NDP to power here in 2009. And with the federal NDP, she did the up to the number of seats significantly in the 1997 election, and then it went down again in 2000. And so she didn't lead them in that way toward power. But Jack Layton, who succeeded her, credits her in many ways, or credited her in many ways with the Orange Wave for the work that she did behind the scenes to save the party, to keep it together. So I think there's that side of it, and then there's the personal side, the side in terms of women in politics. Those are, I think, when Justin Trudeau was elected in 2015, and he announced the gender parity cabinet in his first term, and a reporter said, why? And he said, because it's 2015. And my line to that is, it was 2015 in large part because of Alexa McDonough and all of the work that she did to get us there. We're still not there. I mean, I think you're absolutely right when you said, it's still a rarity to see a woman in power, but it's not as much of a rarity, and we're heading in a different direction. And I think, again, that becomes something that we can credit Alexa for having pushed along the road.
I'm about to say something that's hardly profound, but it's interesting, isn't it? When you take a look back at the most compelling figures in Canadian politics and federal politics over the past 20 years, 30 years, she's on the list. I mean, the New Democrats, she's there. Jack Layton's there. Jagmeet Singh is there. You look at how he is in crowds. Yep. It's not, with the exception of Layton, to a certain degree, it's not really translated into electoral success. But there's been something about federal New Democrat leadership that's from a personal standpoint and from a compelling angle, they've done very well.
They have done very well, and I think you can go all the way back to Tommy Douglas and
Sure.
Some of the early leaders of the NDP. And part of it, there's two ways of looking at this. One is that the NDP is not likely to get in power anytime soon, so it's easier for them to be moral and upstanding. But if you look at Alexa's, comments after 9/11 and the Islamophobia that really grabbed the country and other countries at that time, and there was a debate in the House of Commons, and she stood up and she said, Osama is a Canadian name. And she was talking about little boys who were Muslims who were at that time going home in tears because, they were being attacked in school and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And just to make that kind of comment in the House of Commons in a public way was very important at the time. And she voted her conscience on a bunch of issues that really didn't help her. I mean, going all the way back to Nova Scotia, abortion rights and those sorts of things, those were not popular issues at the time, and if she believed in it, she did it. And I think that's true of a lot of NDP leaders. And again, as I say, they're freed in a certain way from some of the concerns that might otherwise exist because they're not balancing. Are we going to lose a vote here? Are we going to lose a vote there? They can afford to be more public, more moral in some ways.
Yeah.
And I think that was true of Alexa as well.
That's a really interesting observation, Stephen. Congratulations on the book. It was out, I should mention, April 2021, if people want to check it out. Alexa, of course, the title. This is hilarious feedback, and we're getting a whole bunch of it on our live comments, Stephen, is that people have had to switch to headphones as they've been listening to this interview because their Alexa devices are continually activating through the course of our interview. So
let me give you, if you have 1 second.
Yeah, sure.
When I was doing this, I was interviewing Ed Broadbent in Ottawa in his condo, and he was so proud because he had just gotten an Alexa device from his nephew, and he was explaining to me how he could listen to BBC4 and he could do this and he could do that. So for an hour in the interview, every time the word Alexa was said, the device went off. So I can understand it. I sympathize totally with your listener.
I hope everybody's still able to listen to this interview stress-free. Stephen Kimber, our guest this morning. Thanks for this, and have yourself a great weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah,
Take care.
You bet. Sandra says, that's what I always kind of felt the NDP was all about, that kind of personality. Linda Ray says, the political is the personal. Eddie says, I don't feel that way about Jagmeet Singh. That's fine. If it doesn't resonate with you, that's fine. I feel like personally, like a whole bunch of this isn't necessarily need to be a time where I start taking big, huge swipes at people, but I think that Jagmeet Singh leaves a lot to be desired with regards to politics. I think that he's under aware on a lot of political issues. I think he contradicts himself, and I don't think that he'll see, generally speaking, success as the NDP leader. They've been losing seats in subsequent elections, but he's a very compelling, very likable person. I've met him several times in person. I've interviewed him several times. He's very likable. That doesn't mean you agree with his politics. But Jack Layton was the same thing. I had an opportunity to spend about 4 hours with Jack Layton once on a bus, and just the way that, like, obviously, I'm sure he was sort of, performing for the cameras. He was in front of a bunch of reporters, but like a very compelling and likable personality, which can go a long way in politics. It's kind of the whole idea. You're trying to convince people to, in many circumstances, change their minds and vote for you instead of who they voted for last time, right? You can share your thoughts with us on Alexa McDonough, or maybe your thoughts on women in politics. Would love to hear those. We've seen some great comments here on the live chat. Craig says, I remember meeting Jack Layton at a rally for the election about 10 years ago. I was taking photos for journalism school, and I was able to talk to him for a little bit after, and he left a big impression on me. Others are saying everything that they're talking about Alexa, I feel the same way about Rachel Notley, which is an interesting comment. James says, I worked with a lot of politicians. I didn't completely agree with them, but I believed in them. That's an interesting observation, isn't it? Coming up in just a second, as a sports fan, what happens to your fandom? How is it affected when an athlete's off-field conduct or behavior outside of the arena of sport compromises what you might expect? We're going to talk to Seerat Sohi, Tara Slone, and Bruce Arthur. First, I want to remind you that Friesen Brothers is ready for you this weekend. There's nothing better when it comes to a weekend morning than a Friesen Brothers classic sourdough cinnamon bun. They come with my personal recommendation. You can find them at the Friesen Brothers, 16 locations across the province of Alberta in the bakery. The real bakers that put these things together. I think I'm going to go ahead and say I think they deserve the Order of Canada, Sam. That's how I feel about these bakers at Friesen Brothers responsible for these sourdough cinnamon buns. If I was making the list, they would all be officers of the Order of Canada.
I like how you leap over every baking award possible and just go straight to
Order
of Canada.
Let's just go straight to Order of Canada.
Yeah.
Frank Loveson, the founder of Friesen Brothers, he's an officer of the Order.
Well,
why shouldn't all the bakers be? You can find them online at friesen.com. A big shout out to our friends at Athabasca University. I had a great conversation with them just yesterday, and they were bringing us up to speed on some of the things we're going to be telling you about in 2022. So many exciting new programs coming on at Athabasca University. It's Canada's online university, and it's a world-class accredited online programs you're signing up for. This is not one of those sort of experiences where you're going to go, yeah, I've been studying this program, and someone goes, where? And you say the place, and they go, where? Athabasca University, recognized as one of Canada's top research universities. You can learn more about enrollment at athabascau.ca. And for those of you who count your furry friends as family members, those of you dog lovers out there, I want to tell you about Grand Dog Essentials quality raw food. It's what we feed our dogs at home. Moses and Monroe enjoy the quality raw food from Grand Dog Essentials, and we see the health benefits on a daily basis. Now, they're both on different foods because the diets are customized. That's part of what you get when you sign up here. They've got a team of nutritionists that can talk to you, and oh yeah, they deliver right to your door if you're in Calgary, Edmonton, or Central Alberta. Don't forget, when you place your order for delivery online, you get 10% off your first time order when you use the promo code REALTALK at granddog.ca. Well, we've been talking about sports a lot lately. It's not a sports show per se, but a lot of times these stories intersect with life. When the world's number one ranked tennis player is refusing to get vaccinated and essentially is trying to gain admission to a country so he can play in a high-profile Grand Slam tennis tournament, but he's blocked from it, Novak Djokovic, everybody pays attention. Or when a star hockey player, a multi-million-dollar athlete who's not, no stranger to accolades, finds himself on the outs. Talking about Evander Kane and the San Jose Sharks, and then there's rumblings that he may sign with another team that's near and dear to a lot of hearts of people I know that subscribe to this show. Is Evander Kane coming to the Edmonton Oilers? People start talking about troubles with his marriage, troubles with his gambling, allegedly, and other troubles as well around his vaccination status. Should we care about this? As sports fans, should you care if Aaron Rodgers is lying about being vaccinated, or should you care about how many touchdowns he throws for when it matters for the Green Bay Packers? We wanted to put this question in front of three people who are some of Canada's most recognizable sports commentators, personalities. Bruce Arthur, you know him, a Toronto-based columnist for The Star. He was named the 2012 Sports Writer of the Year by Sports Media Canada, and he's been named to Sports Illustrated's list of the top 100 people to follow on Twitter no fewer than 4 times. Tara Slone is the host of Hometown Hockey on Sportsnet alongside Ron McLean. You probably know as well that Tara is a Canadian rock vocalist. She's a former television host on a wildly popular show, Breakfast Television, down in Calgary, former colleague and a good friend of mine. And Seerat Sohi is an NBA reporter based out of Toronto, and I was very excited to see Seerat featured recently on the new documentary. You can find it wherever you find streaming services celebrating the career of NBA legend Vince Carter. To the three of you, welcome to the show. It's great to have you all here. Tara, why don't we go right out of the gates to you? The whole Evander Kane thing. Can you set the scene for us and give us a sense of why this is such a big talker among hockey fans around the world? I think we might have you. There we go. Hi.
Yeah, I'm muted. It never ends. I mean, the chronology, it's so confusing at this point as to like what has happened, but I can kind of list off some of the problems. He's had marital problems. He's been accused of sexual assault. We know that he was found to have violated COVID protocols a number of times with the San Jose Sharks. And then after the fact, seems to have entered Canada illegally, fudging his vaccination status, alleged gambling incidents. So there's been a kind of a laundry list of off-ice incidents. You know, I don't think any of us are in a position to tell people whether they should or shouldn't remain fans. I think that, you know, there are books written on this very topic, a great one by Kavitha Davidson and Jessica Luther, precisely about, you know, reconciling fandom with some problematic issues. But for me, more the question is, why is a team like the Edmonton Oilers willing to sacrifice? Character is such a big word in hockey, right? We want a person of character. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean that you're only loyal to your fellow teammates, but it doesn't matter what you do off the ice or off the field? So I become more concerned when I see the sort of the silence from a captain like Connor McDavid, or just in general, the sort of willingness from a team like the Edmonton Oilers to sort of cast all of that aside. Does it do something to my fandom? Absolutely. Can I, as a human being, have empathy for Evander Kane? I don't know what his life has been like. You know, he is a black man in a predominantly white person's sport. You know, he probably has been labeled his whole life as difficult, and as have many of his black colleagues. So there's a whole other element, I think, that needs to be addressed and looked at here. But you know, there is some illegal activity that cannot be overlooked.
And that's the thing too. It's like if you say, well, there's been marital problems, people will go, well, so what? Like, you know, 50% of marriages end in divorce, but then there's other stuff like alleged sexual assault or things like that where people go, well, this is a little bit more relevant. I have a buddy the other day, Tara, and he happens to be black as well. And I appreciate you bringing that up because he said to me, as a black man, he said to me, where was all the concern? You think Oilers fans would be concerned if they were talking about bringing in Patrick Kane instead of Evander Kane? He says there's been a lot of controversy swirling around Patrick Kane. He goes, what's the main difference between those two athletes? Bruce, I guess you could ask fairly, what is Connor McDavid supposed to say about it? I mean, this guy could wind up being his teammate in 2 weeks. What about the fan base? What about the fans that say they'll find it tougher to cheer for the Oilers if Evander Kane's on the team?
One of the central problems with this, Ryan, is that the sports ecosystem is not built towards character. It does not reward necessarily character. It doesn't reward integrity. It doesn't reward being a good person. It rewards winning. It rewards success in the sport. That's the way it is at all levels. It's the way the whole system has been kind of geared. And for Connor McDavid, for example, he's in a position where he gets judged on his performance and his team's performance. And so it's difficult to separate for some people off ice and on ice behavior. It's difficult in other mediums as well, right? Like, how do you feel about Tom Cruise, and how do you feel about Tom Cruise, the Scientologist? How do you feel about Miles Davis, the artist, and the guy who had a long kind of history of really, really bad behavior towards women? This happens in kind of every major sphere almost. The difference is sports tries to tell you that it's about character. It tries to sell it to your kids. It tries to sell it in a way that your kids should get involved in sports because it will build character. And so that's where this gets, I think, a little bit complicated in terms of marketing, in terms of teams, and in terms of how fans should react. Some fans won't care. They want to watch the team that represents them and that they feel connected to, and they want that team to win. But I think that there is a culture aspect, even within organizations. If you only care about your team winning, I'm not sure Evander Kane helps your team win. I think the list of things, I think what Tara said is exactly right, is that we should consider that being a black man in a white sport like hockey is a complicated endeavor and difficult one. His list of kind of allegations and problems, it touches so many spheres, it becomes a pattern. The problem with sports is it tries to sell you something that it isn't. And this is where, in that area in between, that's where an Evander Kane, or you can name any number of other athletes, that's where they fall into more complicated situations.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about 1,000 athletes, and we'll run off a laundry list a little bit later on in our conversation. We've got a right now live on our website, RyanJesperson.com. If people click on Connect, they can take our question of the week, and they can talk. They can chime in on some of the more controversial sports moments or athlete-related moments of the past number of decades. Seerat, in leading up to this conversation, I thought of that controversial Nike TV spot that was back in the early 1990s with Charles Barkley, you know, where he asserted, "I'm not a role model." Said Chuck in that ad, he says, "I'm not a role model. I'm not paid to be a role model. I'm paid to wreak havoc on the basketball court. Parents should be role models. Just because I dunk a basketball doesn't mean I should raise your kids." Do you buy it?
I mean, I think on some level he's right, but it's a bit of a catch-22 in that it doesn't necessarily matter that it's not necessarily a good thing that athletes, celebrities, of all sorts, really, like, you know, musicians, artists, anybody that I think, you know, does one thing really well that we're amazed by. I think we have a problem in our society where we then tend to believe that they are experts at everything else, honestly, in order to kind of hold up a celebrity worship that we're a little bit obsessed with. And that in and of itself is just, we're stuck with that, right? Like, that's just kind of the world that we live in. So while somebody like Charles Barkley, or really any other athlete, you know, we should respect their humanity, respect their idea of themselves as not having to live up to any extra ideal. The reality is that the responsibility gets foisted upon them, and there's very little that, like, we can really do about that. So to me, it's just about, like, where do we go from this situation? Because on the one hand, you have a lot of athletes who I think are really just trying to, when they speak out, tell us that they are human beings. And then from there, you know, I think the media kind of has an issue, and then just the way that we talk about people in general, of making heroes and villains in stories, right? So for example, you know, anybody who doesn't have the COVID vaccine right now is a villain, right? And they can't play. But I think that there's a twisted morality where the fact that they can't play and that they won't get the vaccine, first of all, it plays into the idea of just, you know, prioritizing your own individual decisions over public health, but also it gets into the sports values that Bruce talked about. And I think, Bruce, you mentioned loyalty, right? Like loyalty to the team. So there's a combination there where I think people outside of the sports world are upset with athletes who aren't getting the vaccine, but they're also upset inside the sports world.
The vaccinated piece is really interesting, actually.
Yeah.
And that's a whole other conversation in a way, because it's reflective of something that every single society on the planet more or less has to deal with. So you get Novak Djokovic, you get Aaron Rodgers, you get Kyrie Irving. And they're incredibly high profile. And one of the problems with that is that Aaron Rodgers has been held up as a role model for his entire career. Novak Djokovic, I would say a little less so, but he is a hero to people in Serbia and across Eastern Europe. And the same thing, Kyrie Irving is one of the most celebrated basketball players. He's a very complicated guy in a bunch of different ways. The Venn diagram, I once went to a vaccine hospital protest, and they said the Venn diagram between flat earthers and the vaccine deniers, it was like a circle. And Kyrie has, he's kind of footsied along with flat earth stuff in the past. But the issue you get, so as Seerat said, Kyrie Irving can't play home games because he's unvaccinated. He refuses to bend on that. That is a loyalty to self versus the team. And again, sports rewards that. Sports rewards individualism to a great degree. The danger you get with the anti-vax situation is that, every anti-vaxxer is a symptom of something. So in the case of Novak Djokovic, there's actually disproportionate Eastern Europeans who grew up with communism and therefore have a deep distrust of government and institutions. And the same thing with Black Americans and minorities around the world. When you have a distrust of institutions, that could apply to Kyrie Irving. Aaron Rodgers just fell into a YouTube rabbit hole, from what I can tell, in a holistic rabbit hole. But every one of them they have the opportunity to influence a lot of people. And when it comes to something like vaccination, that's a societal level impact potentially that could cost people their lives. And so this is what sports is like any other entertainment product, in that it produces fame. It produces an enormous amount of influence for those who are good at it. And we're not going to get conformity across all these sports. In fact, it will be a reflection of society in general. And the problem you get with sports is a lot of people just want to cheer for them, and it makes it more complicated. Aaron Rodgers is one of my favorite athletes to watch ever, and I don't feel great about watching him right now.
But can I just add that, in the case of Djokovic and Rodgers, there's also some dishonesty going on there, right? It's not quite as simple. Like Kyrie, I don't think there's that element, but there's the fact that Novak Djokovic wasn't quite truthful about, the way he entered Australia. And Aaron Rodgers was not quite truthful about, what did he say?
He just straight up lied. He said, I'm immunized.
I'm immunized, which he is probably against measles, mumps, and rubella, right? Yeah. But so, I think that certainly adds to the villain, like you say, the villain narrative. So I'm not sure obviously Kyrie's a big discussion, and I agree with everything everybody's saying, but when you add that element of dishonesty, it certainly doesn't help.
That's a really important point, Tara, and I'm glad you made it. I want to drop in. Our audience never gets a view of this. This is a very special occasion. This is our dashboard for our question of the week. So we can drop in through the week as it's up live on our website and see where people are at before we sort of publish our final results. Check this out. So we ask, are athletes still major role models? Right now, 33% of respondents say absolutely. All kinds of people look up to them. 37% say, well, maybe, but only insofar as we should look to any individual as a role model. In other words, sure, they may be role models, but so am I. Not Ryan, anyone. 19%, it's an outdated model. There are so many other people we can look up to for inspiration now, and 10% of respondents say the philosophy and the glory of a high-achieving athlete is something to aspire to, not the individuals themselves. So they're kind of letting athletes off the hook there. So I think that's pretty interesting. The highest respondent so far, 37%, saying, well, maybe they're role models, but only insofar as, everybody else is too, which is kind of an interesting perspective. I'm a little surprised. Anybody else surprised at the result of that?
I think a part of it is that you gravitate to the people who reflect your priors, right? So for a lot of people, Aaron Rodgers is a hero. And so it allows people to pick and choose what they approve of and don't approve of in sports. And I think that is actually an important and real thing. But again, when it comes to like really bad behavior, Ben Roethlisberger is retiring from the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was accused of rape and at a separate incident of sexual assault. That was a long time ago. And a lot of that was erased from his career. And he got to keep being a star quarterback. And that was kind of effaced and not mentioned and kind of buried over years of performance. I don't know what that teaches fans other than performance in and money generation outweighs like real issues. That again, you take what you want from athletes, from celebrities, from all kinds of things. What the culture signals to people matters. And that's a really complicated subject, and there's so many different parts to it. But on fundamental levels, like the idea of respecting women, the idea of not being a racist, the idea of believing in easily explainable science, all of these are difficult things that are all across our society. And when sports reflects them and in fact enhances the reputation of the people who are in that category, it's not just sports, right? As we've talked about here, but it is a part of sports.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
I think the lesson that sports often teaches us is that winning can inoculate us from any sort of other consequence for our behavior.
Yeah.
And, also like at the end of the day, like in the society that we live in, like if you have power, if you have money, if you have prestige, that is on some level probably going to be true for you, whether or not you're an athlete or a celebrity. Now, having a huge passionate fandom, being able to generate as much money as they do, being among the only people in the world that can do what they do, that obviously adds an element to that too, that just becomes like, I think it can create situations where, honestly, sometimes I feel for the athletes too, because we all learn from the consequences of our actions. And then they do get inoculated from that. And it kind of, it can stunt growth in a lot of ways. But it also makes me think of the book that you mentioned, Sarah, Loving Sports When Sports Don't Love You Back. I read that book. Yeah, there you go.
It's so good.
Nice.
I highly recommend it.
Yeah, seriously. Like if anybody is feeling conflicted about their sports fandom, first of all, I think that's very natural, especially in a time like this. We are learning more and more about the people that we have decided to kind of put on a pedestal. In the last, I'd say since social media, probably the last 5-6 years, we have incredible access to the personalities of the people at the top. And I think that, it deserves evaluation, right? Like it's a moment of probably necessary and healthy, internal conflict for a lot of sports fans. But I'd recommend that book. I think it helped me, figure out a lot of, process a lot of conflicting feelings I have about sports, because it does hurt when you are, as a woman, just, seeing in the NBA just a complete lack of care about, some of the sexual assault allegations against Chauncey Billups, who became the coach of the Portland Trailblazers this season, Jason Kidd, domestic violence allegations, or, he went to, I don't remember, Bruce, maybe you can help me here, but I think he was actually convicted too, or he went to court. And it's tough because on some level, you don't necessarily know these people incredibly well. You don't know how much they've truly ever actually reconciled, but also the world of sports makes it so that they never really actually have to show you that they did so in public. And then it puts them in a position of power once again. And, I imagine for the human brain, I don't know what I would do next if I was in that position.
I think there are almost. Sorry, I'll be super fast because I think Tara needs to talk here more than I do. I think there are two different experiences when you are talking about sports fans, and I think it's different in terms of being a man and a woman. I think the way sports is constructed, the way society is constructed, I think these are very similar things. It is male oriented. It is male dominated. It is tilted towards the experience of a man, and the priorities of men. And so that's why you get the excuse of athletes or coaches who have been accused or even convicted of sexual assault. Like Kobe Bryant is a complicated figure in a lot of ways, but settled a rape case out of court in which he admitted that that consent was not given. And when he died, he is an icon. And that is, I think, I find that to be a complicated thing to deal with. And I think that when he died, I said that's a huge part of his legacy. I think it's harder being a sports fan if you're a woman because of the way sports and again society are constructed. That was not
Well,
short.
and anybody who, you know, even referenced the sexual assault allegations against Kobe at the time of his death or after the time of his death was absolutely skewered. And so, you know, I just want to add that the role of the media is really important, but we in the media also need allies, right? Like it can't just be when you talk about, you know, problems within the Washington football team and how, you know, sexual abuse and misconduct is rampant. Often the people flying that flag and blowing the whistle are women and female journalists, oftentimes, not always. And I want to say that, you know, I think even it's incumbent upon us in the media to navigate this together and to stand beside our colleagues and look into matters like this, because, you know, it feels very lonely when I, as a woman, talk about, you know, my experiences as a female journalist, and none of my male colleagues are on board. So I think that, you know, I understand the court of public opinion is a really intense one, but like, why is this never mentioned when it comes to Patrick Kane? Like Patrick Kane's only talked about as a legend. Why is this not talked about with Ben Roethlisberger? You know, I think we still have to continue to have these discussions and not sweep it under the rug. And that's where we as journalists come in.
Yeah, I mean, there's the whole Jake Virtanen thing with the Vancouver Canucks as well, which is a hugely troubling situation for obvious reasons for the woman impacted by that. Sam, don't show my screen here. I'm going to drop back into the dashboard here, but I want to give the three of you an opportunity to speculate, to guess on something. We've asked our audience members, our respondents to this, which sports figure brought the most shame to their team or sport. Now, I can give you the options that we've given our respondents, or you can just throw one out there if you think there's an all-timer. I can tell the three of you are deep in thought. Do you want to hear the list, or do you want to just throw a name out there and see how you do?
I'm going to guess O.J. Simpson.
Okay, Seerat with O.J.
I think OJ would have to be the top of the list. I think Lance Armstrong's probably on the list.
Tara?
Oh my God. What's the NFLer who was doing the dog fighting?
Yeah, Michael Vick.
Yeah, Michael Vick.
Okay, so check this out. It is, in fact, not O.J. Simpson in the number one spot right now. It is Lance Armstrong. Bruce, 28% of our respondents to this point, and the poll will be opened up until Sunday night, 28% say Lance Armstrong, 20% say O.J., 19% say Jerry Sandusky. Obviously, I mean, I think it could be Jerry murder and child sex abuse. I don't know, like both of them could burn in hell as far as I'm concerned. But those, isn't it amazing that Lance Armstrong, who just, I'm doing finger quotes, but who just doped and sort of lied to everybody and raised about $500 million for cancer under a big lie, but still raised a bunch of money for cancer. He, in many people's mind, was way more shameful, brought way more shame to his sport than a guy who cut his ex-wife's throat and murdered her friend. Like that to me, I don't know how to read into that.
I think O.J. Simpson, I think maybe people forget, right? Like maybe people forget he was ever even an athlete. But like it's double homicide. It's really hard. Like, and every coach or athlete who's ever abused kids, like that deserves its own category, right? Like Jerry Sandusky is not the only one. Lance Armstrong's an interesting one because Lance Armstrong was absolutely a product of his sport. Doping was rampant and has continued to be at some level rampant throughout cycling. Everybody knew it. The only way for Lance Armstrong to become a 7-time Tour de France winner was to dope. It was literally impossible to do it any other way. I think where people get more disappointed with Lance Armstrong is he was supposed to be better. Like the whole narrative of Lance Armstrong is he nearly died from testicular cancer. It got into his brain. He came back, won 7 Tour de France's, raised money for cancer for years and years and years. And in protecting his secret, also destroyed the lives of a number of people, never apologized properly for that, and fell from grace. I think people had higher expectations of Lance Armstrong maybe than anybody else, but I don't think he's the most disappointing even from a sporting perspective. Like, I think the way Lance has conducted himself and the way he let down, I think, people who believed in him through the idea of fighting cancer, including cancer patients. I think that's real. But he, again, it's a product of the sport. He was a product of the sport. O.J. Simpson wasn't necessarily a product of football, because there's a lot of football players who never, ever killed anybody, right? Jerry Sandusky is not a product of college football, in as much as he's a product of institutions and power, right? Like, Larry Nasser, you could put on this list. For
no kidding.
Right? Like, you can go on and on. Again, it's fidelity to institutions. It's fidelity to power. It's fidelity to, when I did a story on Penn State back then, there was a lot of people who could have reported Jerry Sandusky and they didn't, because they'd have been associated with Penn State for such a long time and they believed in the institution and protecting it. And that is something that happens all the way through sports.
There's just no sin greater than lying on Oprah in our society. I think that's what it's come down to.
Yeah, you're probably right. Hey, Tara, you were on. Michael Vick is on the list as well. So you had Lance Armstrong 28%, O.J. Simpson at 20%, Jerry Sandusky 19%, a three-way tie at 8%. Another killer, Oscar Pistorius, is on the list, along with Michael Vick. And then there's, of course, people are writing in their own suggestions. Tanya Harding at 6%. And then there are some others like, Mike Tyson, Pete Rose, 1%. Pete Rose betting on baseball. I don't know why people are voting for Dennis Rodman. What am I forgetting about, Seerat? What did Dennis Rodman do?
Oh, Dennis Rodman was, I think he was definitely, he's an incredibly complicated figure, but when it comes to, there are people who just didn't like his off-court behavior.
Yeah, he was just quirky though, right? When
distraction. He No, but I was going to continue. He was
sorry.
like, there were people who didn't like just the way that he conducted himself. I think there was definitely a lot of homophobia going on there as well. But at the same time, he was also, I believe he assaulted his ex-wife when he was married to Carmen Electra, right?
Right.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, in that marriage, I think there was some stuff, and then there's some other things too where I think he's just he's gotten into fights and things like that, especially when he was a player. So he's definitely I think he's more of a complicated figure than I think people necessarily make him out to be in our society now today, because now I think the things that Dennis Rodman kind of represents are now kind of a little bit more in vogue, and there's kind of we're looking back, and in a lot of ways we should look back at the way that he was talked about in terms of mental health issues as well, but there's definitely another side to him too.
I'd just like to point out really quickly that for a while it was legitimately thought that Dennis Rodman was the best conduit for the United States to figure out what North Korea was thinking.
Yes,
because he was really good friends with Kim Jong-un, and again, when Seerat says incredibly complicated figure, I think she's understating it.
Yeah. I promised the three of you we'd only take half an hour of your time, and you've delivered. Surpassed what we were hoping for, which was just such a great conversation, great points made. I appreciate all of your time. I'm a big fan of all three of your work, and I encourage Real Talkers, if they don't already, follow you on social media and check out the work that you do to do exactly that. Tara Slone is the host of Hometown Hockey. You can catch her all the time on Sportsnet. Seerat Sohi, NBA reporter, Bruce Arthur, columnist for The Star. It's great to have the three of you on Real Talk. Have an amazing weekend.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah,
Thanks, Ryan.
You got it. Yeah, I'm just reading this. I completely forgot Dennis Rodman back in 2015. I don't know if I forgot or if I just never even knew it. Pleaded no contest to misdemeanor spousal battery. Sentenced to 3 years of probation, 1 year of domestic violence counseling, 45 days of community service. Had charges stemming from an incident in April of 2014 when he was arrested at a Los Angeles hotel after his girlfriend, Gina Peterson, reported that he had hit her during a dispute. I didn't realize that. Sarah Hoyles, the editorial producer of this show, is working on next week's broadcasts, and I'm very excited. There's an exclusive we believe we're going to have. I can't tell you about it yet, but we'll announce that over the weekend as soon as we can. And we're also, I want to put this on your radar, coming up next Friday, our Real Talk Roundtable. It's a tradition here on the show every Friday at 9 o'clock Mountain, 11 o'clock Eastern. We bring you a conversation. Next Friday, a week today, we'll be talking about vaccine equity around the globe. Pretty interesting subject matter. We talk a lot about vaccine access. We talk a lot about vaccination rates, vaccination policies, in our own necks of the woods, in our own locales. But But of course, we want to talk about vaccine equity around the globe. What's our responsibility in developed or first world nations toward developing nations? What's our role in helping out? Hoyles, Brooksy, both of you sports fans, of course. It goes without saying. Sam, we know you're kind of a fan of a lot of sports, but a big CFL guy, big hockey fan. Hoyles, the NBA is your wheelhouse, and I'm curious to pick your brain on this. That I loved. I didn't agree with it, but that's not the point. For me, it's not a prerequisite. I don't have to agree with something to respect it or like it. I loved that Charles Barkley ad campaign where he says, "I am not a role model." And he was kind of if you look back, he was obviously with the Phoenix Suns, 76ers. But if you look at that sort of era in the NBA as well, right? The Detroit Pistons were like the bad boys, and there was that whole thing of like, we are not role models. We aspire to be champions. Do you buy it? Are you on board with it? Or for you, does the off-field or off-court stuff matter?
Well, I think whether or not they want to be or see themselves as role models, they are.
Yeah, fair.
And the mention of Kobe Bryant, I mean, that just pisses me off. How when he died tragically in the helicopter accident, he was memorialized and completely washed clean of having raped a woman. And I mean, people even refer to him as Black Mamba. That's a nickname that he gave himself in the midst of that case. And people still refer to him as Black Mamba with respect. And that's his way of basically saying, look what I did and I got away with it. And I'm one of the greatest NBA players of all time. So I get a free pass.
Huh. Sam, how about for you? I mean, does it? I mean, it doesn't matter what sport we're talking about. Just in the sort of the general principle, where do you land on this? Have you found yourself? Let me ask a more pointed question. Are you currently a fan? Here's a loaded question of an athlete or a celebrity who you would acknowledge has questionable off-field track record.
Yeah, I've been racking my brain trying to come up with that. And like I say that because I will fully admit that I'm somebody that doesn't really pay a whole lot of attention to the lives of athletes when they're off the court and off the field. So it's like I don't have a single triggering one that comes to mind right now. But at the same time, I'm quite fully in the camp that, it comes with the territory of being paid millions of dollars to play a game professionally that you're going to be a role model. Like it just, if the people that claim that they're not role models watched athletes on TV and looked up to them. So it's not like they haven't lived the experience of saying that is somebody that I want to be when I grow up. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Where would the two of you have voted with regards to our question of the week, or where will you vote when you take it with regards to the athlete that has most disgraced or brought the most shame to their team and or sport? You heard the options that we listed. Sarah, where would you cast your vote? I'm going to say, like Bruce Arthur said, it's pretty tough to overlook murder. Like OJ, Oscar Pistorius, who killed his girlfriend. At the same time, Jerry Sandusky, child sexual abuse to me, I think that's probably going to earn my vote for the sports figure that brought the most shame to the university, to college football, to the entire football program. Where would you cast your vote, Sarah?
If we're talking about most shame to sports, Lance Armstrong makes sense. If we're talking about being an abhorrent human being, O.J. Simpson, anybody like Nassar, which was mentioned,
Larry Nassar,
don't when folks abuse children when they go to prison, don't they basically get what's coming to them?
Yeah, they call them Skinners.
It's horrendous what those folks have done. Not in prison. In when they abuse children and murdering an estranged wife or an ex-wife. That doesn't even just put something bad on the sport. It's just bad being a terrible fucking human.
I almost kind of want to take the question back because I feel like I'm asking us, like we included that question as part of our question of the week to give us fodder for the conversation with Bruce and Seerat and Tara. But I almost feel bad. It's kind of a strange exercise to say like who's worse. the person that sexually assaulted a bunch of kids or the guy that murdered a couple people. It's kind of like a strange exercise to undergo. Who would you? That said, Sam, back to the strange exercise. If you had to pick someone, who would you pick?
I think I'm in the Sandusky camp.
Sandusky camp.
Yeah, I was thinking about Lance Armstrong, and I actually entirely agree with Bruce Arthur in that he was a product of his sport. That it's like absolutely the constant lying about it and the constant cover up. Is like massively problematic, and I have huge issues with that. But also, like, it is an entirely fair comment to say it's like without doping, you could not compete in that sport. He was just the one that got caught.
The whole sport
Sandusky,
is filthy.
on the other side, we talk about a culture of lying. Sandusky sexually assaulted people and built an infrastructure around him to cover it up.
Yes, and you could say the same thing about Larry Nassar, right? Yeah, with American gymnastics. Troy says, I'll always remember the Family Guy episode where the cops go to arrest Kobe, but then they just stop and stare in awe when he starts spinning a basketball on his finger. Joanne says, look at the fans that supported Michael Jackson and that still do. That's a great example, Joanne. We could talk for half an hour but just about MJ. And like, I love Michael Jackson's music. I love it. And I have I have very mixed feelings when I hear it. And I haven't, ever since I watched that documentary, to be honest, I haven't played Michael Jackson's music in our home. And it's kind of hard to separate yourself from the product and the person. Right?
It's the adage of art from artist. I will fully admit, for years my go-to karaoke song was Billie Jean.
Sure.
Which, at the 5-minute mark, I always regret doing a 6-minute song in karaoke.
Yeah, nobody needs a 6-minute karaoke song. I would like to see you sing karaoke, Sam. We might have to have like a Real Talk karaoke party. Sarah, do you have a go-to karaoke song?
Journey, Don't Stop Believing.
Oh, great. Yeah. It's almost a little.
Don't stop.
I'm taking huge shots at the both of you. It's a little cliche, isn't it? Don't stop. It's a little.
I'm
cliche,
okay with that.
The whole room.
I'm okay with that.
The whole room is a sing along when you bring it up, right?
Yeah.
It's just like, you're commanding an orchestra when you pick "Don't Stop Believing."
I've actually just switched up my karaoke song, my go-to song, within the past month or so, because I had to retire. A song that I had been rocking for quite some time. I had, basically, as far as I'm concerned, mastered Annie's song by John Denver. It's like you fill up my senses, like that, in the tiny blue
don't
ocean.
Stop!
Like a wind on the... so people don't expect that. At karaoke, they're not expecting that. They don't expect John Denver. So it always wows, and it's like 2.5 minutes, and it builds and builds and builds and builds, and it allows me to get just shy of my falsetto. However, my problem, Sarah, is that I karaoke'd as a verb with the same people on back-to-back-to-back occasions over the course of a couple of years, which means that I kept trying to trot out the same song, and they sniffed me out. They figured it out quickly, and they were like, you're a one-trick pony. And so I had to find a new song. But you can't just find it. It's like a nickname. You can't just nickname yourself. You can't just find it and until it hit me. And now I have it, and it's the Linda Ronstadt version of When Will I Be Loved? Right?
You like the slow ones, the slow burn.
Oh, no, but this... it's got the big opener, like I've been readed and mistreated.
Yes.
When will I be loved? And then we just get into it, and then yeah, thank you. The live studio audience loves it. While the applause keeps going, this is my chance to remind you that everybody's going to be clapping when we find out which 20 people found new employment at Kubi Energy this spring. That's right, it's their spring hiring blitz. And Jake, the CEO at Kubi, wants me to let you know that they're hiring sales personnel. They're hiring installers, which means that if you're a journeyman electrician or you're an electrical apprentice, or maybe you don't even know the first thing. What's some electrical terminology, Sam? Is like positive and negative? Is that electrical terminology?
Yeah, that sounds great.
AC, DC?
Also electrical terminology.
Whether you don't...
2 different types of current.
You might not even know your AC from your DC.
That would be a problem if you're an electrician.
Right, but
that would
maybe
be a big problem.
Maybe you're electrically curious and you're looking for... Jake, I said, what's the number one thing you want me to tell people about your hiring? He said, we're going to hire the person over their professional skill because we can train the skill. He said, we want to find people that are looking for a new opportunity. They want to join our team at Kubi Renewable Energy. I hope this speaks to you. If it does, you can find them online at kubienergy.ca. Our friends at Park Power are your friendly local utilities provider. They power our hashtag, Real Talk RJ, 24 hours a day. They want to be your electricity, natural gas, and internet provider. You can compare rates online today. And when you decide whether you're going to go with the fixed rate or the variable rate, whatever makes more sense for you financially, you let their team know. They'll switch you over and they will break up with your former utilities provider on your behalf. You don't have to do it, which is fantastic. And a shout out to our friends at Local Waste. They've been keeping it local across the prairies, in particular Alberta and Saskatchewan, for 25 years, earning the business and the referrals of their clients, whether it's a construction project that you have underway, whether it's your commercial outlet, maybe it's a small business that you run, or heck, maybe it's a residential application. Maybe you're clearing out your basement. Maybe the spring cleaning project is set to go underway and you could use one of those 10-foot bins. They go all the way up to the big 40-footers. You can get your quote, a free quote, online today at localwaste.ca. Of course, you know that every Friday, our friends at Local Waste allow us to blow off a little steam by way of a partnership, a sponsorship, if you will. It's a tradition here as we wrap up our broadcast week. We call it Trash Talk. These are all real emails received to talk@ryanjesperson.com, like this one from Lisa, who says, quick note to my neighbor, who's a delightful fella. I can't quite wrap my mind around your reoccurring policy of shoveling during snowfall. You're diligent and responsible, and you're a great guy to live beside. Don't get me wrong, but your shoveling is stressing me out. Don't you realize the work that you're doing is immediately being undone by Mother Nature? The snow is still falling. You have to realize this. For a guy that's so efficient and organized and pragmatic, and I just can't wrap my mind around it. Are you trying to mess with me? Is this all performance art? Like, why don't you wait until the snow stops falling, then shovel your walk like we do? I know it shouldn't drive me nuts, but it does, and I'm hoping you hear this and make just a tiny adjustment so I can go back to spying on other people through my second-floor bedroom window instead of watching you shovel through a snowstorm as I mutter to myself. That from Lisa. Feels good to get it off your chest, Lisa. This one from Scott, who says, I would like to talk about Rex Murphy. I'd like to talk about his column, Why Is It Canada's Duty to Destroy Its Economy and Confederation in the Pursuit of Net Zero? Now, before I start pointing out all the gaping flaws in Rex's logic, it's important to put Rex Murphy into context. By the way, you may not expect this, I love Rex Murphy. I'm a huge Rex Murphy fan. That's one of the surprising things about me. Back to Scott's email. He says he's a partisan hack. He presents himself as the logical right-wing Mr. Spock that tells you how it is, but really he's only talking to and dealing with right-wing think tank politicians and thus pushing out wedge issue propaganda. Like I said, he's a partisan hack. Now, nowhere in these editorials is there any hint of any data that Mr. Murphy uses to base his opinion on. I believe it's by design. If he provided facts, then the reader would be bogged down and distracted from framing the argument as a culture war, that liberal versus working class Albertans narrative that Rex is trying to push. Scott goes on to say, I think it's funny, by the way, that Rex Murphy shares the same name as the green dinosaur in Toy Story, Rex, because when I read his article, I see his inability to adapt to the future realities of the world, and I would pay good money to see him dress up as Toy Story Rex and do a live reading of his article, but I do fear the joke may be too much on the nose. Signed, PBS. That's Patreon boss Scott. Attaboy. How about this one from Ty, who says, I hope this email finds Real Talkers safe and healthy. I wish the leadership of this province, the so-called Right and Honorable Jason Kenney, would get his head out of his rectum. The sheer physics of how he's managed this feat is rather mind-blowing. His cranium's huge, and not to rip off comedian Mike Myers with his "it's like a watermelon on a toothpick" thing. Has he done some sort of a sick Cirque du Soleil skill as he continues to just ram his head up there? Energy War Room, fail. Justice Minister, fail. Harm reduction, fail. Coal mining, fail. Mass to protect our children, hard fail. In closing, he's clearly unfit to lead. Maybe we can have some kind of UCP bubblegum blowing contest to pick the next leader. You know, pin the tail on a moron. Road apple bopping. Signed, tie. How about this one from Allison, who says, I've been listening to Real Talk, and one of the points touched on it stirred something within me. It's been brewing through this pandemic. She says, you see, I've long struggled with mental health. Like many millennial women, I went through my adolescence with undiagnosed ADHD. This led to anxiety and depression. Now, when I realized at the age of 21 that something may be wrong, not because of my own healthcare professionals, but rather the internet, the process of accessing mental health resources was beyond ridiculous. It's no wonder that people either give up trying or search more accessible means like drugs or alcohol to cope. Now, to hear the government and Facebook keyboard warriors talk about how mental health is important, these lockdowns are killing us, makes me angry. For the record, we've never been in a lockdown. If it's so important, make it easy. Make it easier for people to get help. Put mental health centers all across the province. Provide subsidies for medication and psychiatric supports. Of course, these cost money, but if mental health is so important, fucking do it. The only reason it's important to this government now is to get people back to work, kids back to school, so the economy keeps moving. So don't come to us now and say that mental health is important to you. People with mental health issues have long been ignored by government and stigmatized by the rest of society. The pandemic has surely brought the issue of mental health to the forefront artificially, and I hope that at some point the government will walk the walk instead of just offering empty platitudes. And then, like a good Canadian, Allison signs off, thank you. And this one finally from Graham, who heard my interview with Batya Ungar Sargon last week, and he says, Jesperson, what the fuddle-duddle were you doing pretending that a COVID-denied trash fire has a legitimate perspective just because she pretends to be some sort of a leftist instead of being a standard-issue alt-right troll? Would you have booked those Muppets who showed up at Jason Copping's house, the health minister, if one were to claim to be a card-carrying NDPer who just happens to be opposed to public health measures? Does it really matter whether they self-identify as left or center or right when they're fully committed to disinformation no matter which way? That from G, who says he'll keep tuning in no matter what. I love it, G. I love you. I love everybody. Thanks for being here for the conversations we don't always agree on. That's where we find common ground. It's where we reiterate our perspectives or sometimes even change our minds. It's the mandate of Real Talk, and we'll be back doing it again Monday morning. Stay safe this weekend, friends. If you're out at Jasper, maybe I'll see you on the hill at Marmot Basin. We'll talk to you soon.